Good afternoon, buenas tardes, saludos, muchas gracias. Muchas gracias, estoy muy contenta de estar aquí entre ustedes. Thank you so much for having me here, especially to you, Charles, for inviting me, and also for the tribal nations of this land, or the people from this land that have been taking care of this land for, as I hear, from millennia. So I'm Monti, Aguirre. It really is an honor to be here. You know, I work, I go around, you know, spend a lot of time with Indigenous people, especially in Latin America, and being here with you is just an honor. And I'm going to be telling this story over there, so that you know, I'll tell them about the bison and how you're talking about the bison, and you're talking about, and forgive me, my pronunciation is not 100%, you know, but it's okay. I'll be telling people about the bison, the buffalo, and how you integrate self-determination with that, with the free-roaming bison. I mean, encapsulating all that, it's very powerful, especially now that many Indigenous people are going through forming their own, what they call gobiernos territoriales autónomos, autonomous territorial governments, which is self-determination, really, you know. Okay, so I was born by the Magdalena River in Colombia, where I learned how to swim when I was, you know, I was a very young girl. I was actually, many of the fish that my parents caught, the catfish, were way bigger than I was when I was learning how to swim. And we spent many times at the beach, you know, at night and during the day, waiting for the subienda, for the, you know, the migration of the fish going up the river of the Magdalena. And, you know, just really special times. And so I'm Monti Aguirre. I'm part of the team of International Rivers. We're a very small organization that is about 35, 36 years old. And we've been working to alongside of communities affected by dams to ensure that the rights are protected as well as the rights of rivers. And we focus then on dams mostly, you know. So water is essential for life, but freshwater ecosystems are polluted, fragmented, and degraded all over the world. These systems, this river systems sustain the highest rate of biodiversity per square mile than any other ecosystem on Earth, yet they're also the most threatened by human activity. Over 70% of rivers no longer flow freely. 70% of rivers of this world do not flow freely. Yes, we gotta do like what we're doing with the bison, we gotta do with the rivers too. And what we have seen is an 84% loss in wildlife populations since 1970, especially fish. The momentum, though, for permanent protection for rivers is growing. All over the world, I should say. 1 million animal and plant species are at the risk of extinction. The majority of the world's longest rivers have been dammed, fragmented, and or polluted, with alarming consequences for human rights, local economies, and the environment. And the world is really reaching a point of no return on climate change. And we have examples, like here in the United States, like the Wildlands and the Rivers Act, which, I won't spend much time on this, but an act created by Congress in 1968 to preserve certain rivers with outstanding natural, cultural, and recreational values in a free-flowing condition for the enjoyment of present and future generations. So values, the criteria the free-flowing, recreation, all that, very important to be protected. And I think it was really this act that after fighting, I'm not saying because it is a fight against dams for decades. You know, I said, well, my hair's already, getting gray, and there's still all these dams being built, and we still gotta fight it. Well, while we do that, can we also then think about ways of protecting rivers in a permanent way? And I looked at and learned a lot from the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, and really inspired me. Right now we have draft laws in Colombia, in Brazil, in Chile, and in Peru, possibly in India, very possibly in Guatemala. You know, what I'm saying is that other countries, other people are also looking at the importance of protecting rivers with durable protections. And then what we have in Europe, we also have some protections that I just want to say that some of the most, I want to say that the reason why this protections measures started to be put on the table were basically because of the damage that dams had caused on rivers, throughout Europe. And Spain has some very interesting provisions that one could look at. I won't spend much time on that. And I was saying the movement is growing. We have the preoccupation of the status of rivers, but more than that too. This morning, when I was talking about rights of nature, and today I believe it was somebody else was speaking about that too. That has been something that has really sparked ideas, has sparked a movement. And when we talk about rights from nature, we're really talking about the idea that nature possesses fundamental rights, just as humans do. And nature has the rights to exist, to prosper, and to be restored, to restore. This movement has ancient roots, in indigenous people's traditions that arises from indigenous people's tradition, and that always have treated, nature as part of, humans as a part of nature. And what we're challenging then, because this is a big we, is really Western philosophy that came out, let's say, in the 16th and 17th century, which states that separation between nature and humans. And this is why this movement it has all the potential to be very transformative, because it's going beyond that. It's pointing out at those divisions that also have caused what has happened to the bison, what has happened to the jaguar, what has happened to many, many other beings. And the movement to protect rivers within the rights of nature, rivers have become a focus of it. And so now we're starting to see examples of that all throughout the world. We prepared with the Earth Law Center and many other groups, the Mekong Coalition, the Rights of Rivers, South Asia, and many other groups, Forum, Social Forum in the Amazon, the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Rivers. And I just wanted to read this. The rights are the right to flow, the right to perform essential functions within an ecosystem, the rights to be free from pollution, to be fed by sustainable aquifers, right to native biodiversity, rights to regeneration and restoration. And how does this happen? It happens in different ways. It happens through negotiations, for example, like it happened in New Zealand with the Maori and the Wanganui River. It happens within the constitutions in Ecuador, for example, Article 71, and then possibly in Chile, because it's already, we'll know in September whether it gets approved. It also happens by municipal bylaws, like here in the United States, great example that can happen definitely in federal states in a better way, an easier way. Indigenous bylaws, as we'll see in a few minutes, or in laws themselves, like in Bolivia. This building of jurisprudence, building constitutionality with this with, within an epistemological and theoretical bundle of ideas that are really exciting to me. And then how do these cases happen? Because you actually do go to court. The river goes to court with the guardian, right? And how does that happen? Based on principles like the precaution, like this is more well known, prevention, right? In dubio pro natura, in dubio pro agua. What does that mean? That when in doubt, nature wins, water wins. You know, so these are some of the incredible ideas that are popping out in this way of thinking, or in local parentis, or you know, this patria jurisdiction, and which still anthropocentric. You know, we're really trying to get from that anthropocentric perspective. This one still does it, and it's, especially in India, they use this principle the most, and that what that means really is, oh, I'm so sorry, did I? Okay, I did. That, you know, parents should take care of their children. Out of this nature, the rivers were their children, and that's what we need to do. So it's a little bit different. Bioculturalism, ecocentrism, I want to emphasize that, that is perhaps that nature has fundamental rights, so it really goes beyond any anthropocentric perspective. And let's look at some of the cases that we have here. The Wanganui case in New Zealand, what I wanted to say is that they fought for more, or they worked to protect the river for more than 140, 150 years. And it was really through a series of negotiations all throughout that they signed an agreement at the end in 2017 with the parliament adopting the protection of the river as a law. And the law also came, the mandate with creating the guardians of the rivers as a legal body, and there are different kinds of legal guardians that include, you know, the Maori people as well as some government agencies. And the important thing here is that incorporates the cosmovision of the Maori and their traditional knowledge. And this becomes really important in all the cases that are being worked, prepared. Yes. Then the Atrato River, perhaps you've heard more also about this. This is in Colombia, in an area where, you know, mining has caused quite a lot of, you know, pollution and all that. But how it happened was that the lawyers and communities went to court to protect, defend the rights of the communities that were Afro-Colombian communities that were being affected by mining. But what the judge does, what the court does, it says, well, not only the people have rights, but the river also has rights. You know, and it is building this jurisprudence that becomes really important. And I'm just talking about a few cases, but there are more. So this is what then the court says, you know, that the river should be protected, restored, conserved, maintained. They list a whole bunch of things, how it should be done, agencies that should be involved, and that, you know, it takes a long time, but it's you know, slowly happening. I wanted to mention the case in India, because the cases in India, if you read some of the decisions, for me they're just like really immersed in poetry, beautiful in talking about the spiritual aspect of and the relationship between, you know, spiritual relationship between people and the river, like the Ganges and the Yamuna. And then, of course, we had the experience of the magpie just a couple of years ago in Canada, you know, and this is one case of those municipal bylaw for the river to be protected that way, as well as through Indigenous bylaw. And then the Klamath that you know way more than I do, but that has been also a very important example of the protection of the river. Well, I try to rush through this, but I just wanted to say thank you very much, and you know, we can talk later, but this is really exciting. This is transformative, and along the lines of the panel that was here earlier, talking about that need for transformation, for changes, all that, making those connections with nature that you start seeing, and for example, in some of the cases that, and some of the amicus curiae that we prepare. I'm not a lawyer, but I work with a lot of lawyers. It is really important to elicit the cosmovision. It's really important to elicit the connectivity between humans and the natural world, humans as part of the natural world. That becomes really essential. And an interesting thing is that science, while at one point had made those divisions, tried to, and still does, for all the reasons, to make those divisions, that separation that was spoken about in the panel earlier, then it is also through science that we're starting to see the connectivity. We're starting to see that rivers and forests and the clouds, the flying rivers, are all connected as well as we are in that system. Thank you.
Dueling computers here going. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chad Colter. I'm from the other side of the Continental Divide here, from Fort Hall. I'm a member of the Shoshone Bannock tribes, and I've been working for them as of Saturday the 28th for 28 years now as a fisheries biologist for the tribes. Doing conservation work has been my whole professional career for the tribes. In the beginning, I started day one with working in the Federal Columbia River Power System and helping implement their fish and wildlife mitigation program. All of these things are about conservation. All of these things are about water. I'm a fish biologist, so I'm kind of fish-centric, and I kind of see the world through the water, and sometimes the wildlife side of me it's water that I really pay the most attention to. It's just the way I am. I was raised that way. I think it's important for you to know who I am and where I come from. My mom is a tribal member, a Shoshone Bannock tribal member. I hope I do justice to this mom. Enough greats in there. My great grandfather was Totombi, who was a signature to the Fort Bridger Treaty. My grandfather's side, my mother is Lemhi Shoshone. And on my dad's side, who's white, he's a Colter. And I'm sure you're all familiar with John Colter, who came over with Lewis and Clark. I'm related to him on that side as well. So it's kind of a strange mix that I end up being where I am. But here I am. What the tribes have done is create a adaptive management plan for climate change. And we've seen this, well, we heard the writing on the wall long ago. So we've decided that it was important enough to actually seek some funding and actually go after the funding and create this plan. We were successful with that. It was a year-long process of working with tribal membership, as well as working with our environmental staff, fish and wildlife staff, to come up with not only assessment of the impacts of ambient temperature change on air, on water, and our view of snowpack, what's going to do to snowpack. But we took that and took it a step further and made it into, well, how is that going to affect species that concern us? Big game species, plant species. So we tried to focus how vulnerable were these different species that meant something significant to us. What our assessment, and I'm sure there are many other assessments, including the GYC assessment for climate change, shows that there are winners and there are losers in this game. And unfortunately, those that are generalists, such as we heard in our last presentation about generalists and specialists, if you were here, Dr. Little Bear talk about it. I mean, it's true. Those that are generalists in this climate here are going to be those that are going to survive. Those that are the specialists, that find that certain little niche when it comes to climate change, are going to suffer. What I had today was, I wanted to share with you a little video clip that we developed to kind of help explain from the tribal members' perspective how it's impacting members of the tribes. So if you bear with me just a minute to get this started, and I'll show you what our membership thought. Maybe, there we go. About how climate change would impact them. I'm used to tapping this, they don't tap. Oh, we gotta go.
Let's give it one, let's do a second.
I'm gonna catch up.
It goes back to our ancestors way back when they chose this area to live during what they call the treaty era. And it was chosen for what we call Demon-Ba. Demon-Ba means our water. And what water is our life.
The Shoshone Bannock tribe is a pairing of many bands of people. The Shoshone people and the Bannock people. The Snake River is really an important feature to our people. It holds the sacred water that we depend on.
All this area used to be able to be what they call sagebrush. And the sagebrush is something that we use for medicinal purposes. But when agriculture came and people started farming the land, they wanted, potatoes, they wanted alfalfa, wheat. I call it the termination era when they wanted us to be farmers rather than hunters, fishermen.
When the agricultural expansion happens on and off reservation, when people start draining water to water their farm fields, we're actually seeing reduced flows out of our springs. You kind of see the vegetation changing, the streams are changing. It seems like there's more moss and not as much wildlife.
The climate is changing and we're not prepared at this moment, and we need to get prepared, and soon.
It's pretty important to understand and be educated how we may have to live with climate change.
These are the things we can do now. These are the things it's going to take us a couple years to get going on, but we can start now on planning for them. These are the big long-term goals that we aspire to.
And they fold over into the next plan.
Sure.
We start thinking about not just one resource, but all resources and how those cycles kind of work together. We're going to have to start looking at some new factors that maybe we haven't been looking at and we should have been looking at the whole time.
I cherish my reservation just because that's where my family is and all of my family. So when I think about my position here, I think about managing in a way that they have something in the future to manage themselves and that we just don't mess it up.
What we call Drimal. Those things are what the old people passed on to us to take care of for the future of our kids, for the future of our plants, the water, and so forth. We're faced with this
So we've done a series of videos working with a tribal consortium that we created a number of years back called the Upper Snake River Tribes. So if you're interested in more of what we've done for climate change, you're more than welcome to go to their website, the Upper Snake River Tribes Foundation, where we've worked with 4 different tribes there to create a climate change adaptation plan that looks at all of our special interests. We assess what change will be there, and then we compare it to what the species are that we're most concerned with. And it's kind of how we've viewed a plan. Now, The Shoshone Bannock tribes have been fortunate enough to be involved in some mitigation programs that have provided a significant amount of money for us to be involved in recovery programs, conservation programs for listed species. I've been engaged in the Columbia River Basin, the Federal Columbia River Power System, the fight to remove dams since 1994 when I started with the tribes. In 1991, I believe, because of the tribes, the Shoshone Bannock tribes, I believe the salmon effort, the recovery effort was initiated. We petitioned for the listing of sockeye salmon, which the federal agencies agreed with in 1991, which started that whole roll of all of the listings of salmon. If you're around tomorrow, I'll talk a little bit more on another presentation on that. But everything I do is related to water. It's related to water quality. And the animal that we're dealing with here today with climate change, it's like nothing we've ever faced before. Like I said, there's going to be winners and losers. And the one thing that we need to do as people, as Indian people, as all people, is start fixing your backyard. I mean, it starts at the headwaters here. We need to be repairing these headwaters, and this is what we're doing. I've got people out there implementing high-tech, multiple, multi-year, multi-phase projects to fix large rivers. I've got guys out there putting in beaver analogs with just their hands and materials on the ground to make sure that we can saturate these grounds and keep the water where it needs to be, which is in the headwaters. It's a big sponge. We've got to maintain these riparian areas. That's what we're doing, a mix of projects that are on federal lands, they're on tribal lands, they're in our headwaters, they're down lower in the river. It's a huge mix, and I wish I had more time to talk about all of these things, but we got a short little window, and I'm just trying to open you up to what we're doing. If you are interested, please give us a call. We're more than happy to show folks what we're doing on the ground. So with that, I will turn the mic over.
Thank you for the introduction. I wanted to start by saying how grateful I feel right now to be here. We had such a powerful morning of speakers. The last panel was absolutely amazing on bison. And I feel really honored to sit at this panel with these panelists, just esteemed people working on amazing issues across the globe and locally on water. I think about, I was driving down from Bozeman. One thing my bio did not mention is I live in Bozeman, Montana. I consider that the ancestral homelands of Blackfeet, Salish, Shoshone, Osalegay Crow, and many other tribes. As I was driving down from Bozeman yesterday afternoon with my family across the Ipsark-Beartooth Front, which is a place really close to my heart, I was scratching my head thinking, what did I do to get on this panel with these guys? And then I realized, full disclosure, when you organize the panel, you get to choose if you want to be on the panel. So I was like, I got a head start here. But there's something much more important than that for me about why I'm here. And I, in all earnest, was thinking about that. Why are we all here? Why are we coming together for this event? And the first thing that came to my mind as I had this amazing landscape of lush lowlands and snow in a high country was this concept of love. And love has been talked about for the eons across the globe. What does love mean? And what is love? Well, love has to have some kind of relationship. And I thought that it's interesting that Leroy Littlebear earlier in the last panel was emphasizing relationship and the power of relationship and the paradigm shift that we have when we're in this concept of relationship. And so I started thinking about, what does it mean to be in relationship with a landscape or with a homeland. And for me, there's some element of intimacy. Intimacy, again, is somewhat of a loaded topic, but I come from this Zen Buddhist practice where we talk about intimacy, and intimacy in that context is oneness. And so I started thinking, oh, what does it mean to be one with a place? And it's most obvious. We drink the waters. We breathe the air. We eat the food from the land. We eat the beings that move across the landscape. They become us. That is intimacy. That's oneness. And that's why we're here, because we have this amazing love for this amazing place. We want to protect it. We want to protect the waters. And we recognize there are threats. So I'm going to talk about a couple of these threats today. So I'm going to, in like the remaining 15 minutes that I have, I'm going to talk about the Greater Yellowstone Climate Assessment, the Montana Headwaters Legacy Act, which is Wild and Scenic Rivers Protection, and then just touch on an emerging concept, an emerging campaign really right here on the Wind River Reservation related to water. Before I leave the slide, I just want to point out that I found this from my own archives of being a wilderness guide and being a person who was very fortunate to get paid to walk the earth. This is the Upper Graybull country in a place now known as the Washakie Wilderness, named after Chief Washakie from the Shoshone tribe. And I think it's very representative of what exists now and what we're to see in the future. If you can see the photograph closely, you see wildfire haze in the distance. In the foreground, there's a large burnt forest. I mean, this thing covers tens of thousands of acres. And in the middle ground, that's the Graybull River. And you can see it's late season, water is low, it's still flowing, and there is actually still lushness around that riparian zone. And those are the most important places that we have in this ecosystem, and those are some of the places that Chad was talking about that are most important for protecting in the future. So climate change is the most pervasive transboundary conservation threat to the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem in our time. As an existential threat, its scope affects all resources and all people. Keeping this in mind, the Greater Yellowstone Coalition partnered with climate scientists at Montana State University, the University of Wyoming, and the United States Geological Survey to better understand exactly what is going on with climate in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. We focused on a few main things across this place. 1, temperature, 2, precipitation, 3, snowfall, 4, stream flow, and then 5, voices, as in people who live within this ecosystem. And the assessment addressed long time ago climate, like paleoclimate, present, more recent climate from 1950 to 2020, and then climate projections for the future. And by the way, if you're interested in this assessment, we do have copies out on the desk, and it looked like we're getting low, but I'll pull out another box later. So you've heard about the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. It's been talked about a bunch, and just here are like the underlying facts about this place. It's one of the last remaining relatively intact ecosystems that's a temperate ecosystem in the world. It was originally defined in the 1970s to encompass the minimum range of an island population of grizzly bears. The ecosystem boundary is now defined as about 22 million acres. It includes northwest Wyoming, eastern Idaho, and south central Montana. That includes 2 national parks, 5 national forests, 3 wildlife refuges, 20 counties, state and private land. And then when it comes to tribal nations, there's the eastern Shoshone, the northern Arapaho, Apsaligee Crow, northern Cheyenne, Shoshone and Bannock, all with reservations either right within the ecosystem or right adjacent to the ecosystem. But there are 49 tribes that have ancestral connection to this place. So in some ways, disregard the boundaries of those reservations as we think about tribal connections to this place. So the assessment focuses on the dark boundary that you can see on this map, which is roughly the boundary of the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And then within that boundary, our team of scientists and social scientists looked at 6 major watersheds within the ecosystem, and that's the Upper Yellowstone, the Bighorn, the Upper Green, the Snake Headwaters, the Upper Snake, which is really defined as waters flowing below or downstream from Idaho, and then the Missouri Headwaters. So here are the findings. I mean, I could talk about this climate assessment for hours, but I tried to summarize this in just a few slides. Here are the recent findings from 1950 to 2020 that are most fascinating in my mind and sobering. Warming has increased on average 2.3 degrees Fahrenheit in 70 years across the ecosystem. The growing season is 2 weeks longer. Below 8,000 feet, snowfall has declined by 24 inches, which is about 25% of our snowpack we have lost in the last 70 years below 8,000 feet. And the reason we use 8,000 feet is because that's where most of the monitoring takes place. We don't know as much information above 8,000 feet, but we can say that definitively 25% loss. Why is that important? Snowpack is our water storage for the year. It's important for irrigation, it's important for fish and wildlife and people. Peak annual stream flow is now occurring 8 days earlier since 1950. So not only do we have less water storage in the form of snow, but we're losing it faster, earlier into the spring. And then what's interesting here is spring and fall precipitation have increased, but winter and summer precipitation have actually declined. So springs are wetter, falls are actually a little bit wetter, but overall, the times when we need precipitation the most, snow and rain in the summer, we're losing. So I'd like to talk about just what are the projections for the future. The IPCC, which stands for Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, uses these terms RCP, Representative Concentration Pathways. They're basically the amount of greenhouse concentration, not greenhouse emission, but greenhouse concentration that's in the atmosphere at a given time. RCP 4.5 is what you would expect if people got their acts together and mitigated for climate change. RCP 8.5 is a scenario where we don't do anything, and here's what happens. So you can see the blue line represented by the mitigation path still increases. So temperatures are going to increase regardless. But if we do something about it, they will increase less, and the less is a huge difference, and that's 5 degrees Fahrenheit. That's by the end of the century. What this might mean to you personally, if you live in a community like Bozeman, you went from having about 10 to a dozen days of 90-degree temperatures in the summer to now having over 20, and as trends continue, we'll have over 40 in the summer. Communities like Pinedale and Jackson inside the ecosystem went from having 0 days over 90 degrees to having roughly 10, or a few more than 10 to a dozen by the end of the century. And then in terms of annual snow water equivalent, we're continuing to see departures and less snow, although the good news is that under the mitigation scenario, again, the blue line marked here, there is a leveling out that happens toward the end of the century. So let's get our act together and work toward that. I mentioned before we integrated voices of the ecosystem into this assessment. It was really important for us. We realized that public opinion and human action play an integral role in ecological management and climate action. So taking this in mind, we put a team together of qualitative scientists to come up with surveys and interview 44 people across the ecosystem in the 6 watersheds, representing different cross-sections from agency, agriculture, conservation, local government, recreation, and tribes. We developed these surveys, conducted interviews, coded them, transcribed them, and then built this into a chapter within the climate assessment. The major takeaways are: 1, water issues are at the core of climate change. People realize that no matter what, we are going to be dealing with more and more drought and a change in the way that we're receiving precipitation. We need to adapt for it. What's more, we learned that people tend to talk about climate change in the same way based on where they come from, or the type of stakeholder, for lack of a better word, that they come from compared to the location of the ecosystem that they live in. And then addressing water issues will have positive impacts on myriad other conditions, including wildlife, habitat, fisheries health, and the economy of local communities. This is a good thing because regardless of the people who we interviewed, most folks seem to think that if we work together, there will be benefits across the place. So shifting topics here, I just want to talk a little bit about something that we're doing at the Greater Yellowstone Coalition with a bunch of partners to address climate change and to address the preservation of our wild free-flowing rivers. And that is working on this bill called the Montana Headwaters Legacy Act, which is wild and scenic river protection for some of our most iconic streams on the Montana side of the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Monti mentioned this act earlier in her presentation. For those who aren't familiar with it, because it's not as familiar of a tool compared to, say, the Wilderness Act, it does three main things. It protects the free-flowing nature of a river from dams and major diversions. It maintains or enhances water quality. And then it protects what are called outstandingly remarkable values, which is a completely wonky congressional term for the things that make a river special. But those can include cultural heritage sites, recreation access, fish and wildlife habitat, geology, history. And there's a group of us that are working at a national level to encourage the federal agencies, particularly the Forest Service, to include climate refugia as a new outstandingly remarkable value. So we're part of this coalition that's been working on this legislation for 11 years. The coalition is called Montanans for Healthy Rivers. We came together initially recognizing that, man, Montana has some of the best wild free-flowing rivers in the world, and most of them don't have any form of federal protection. So we thought there was a niche for scaling up river protection if we worked together across businesses, across private landowners, with tribes, conservation groups, and with the sportsman community. And over a decade of outreach went into building this legislation, and ultimately through hundreds and hundreds of meetings, we're now at a place where we've got over 3,000 Montanans that have endorsed this legislation, 1,300 businesses. We've got 6 county commissions, including some recent ones we picked up that were key in Gallatin and Park County, Fishing Outfitters Association of Montana, Montana Outfitting Guides Association. They've all been a part of this work. And a lot of this is because we realized we all have in common a few things. Protecting rivers supports the economy, it protects our fish and wildlife, and it protects our outdoor way of life. Part of our work has been working with tribes on this issue. You know, it's no surprise, we recognize that these lands that are mostly on, most of the rivers are flowing on federal public lands. You know, these have been ancestral lands for millennia. And you know, it was really important for us to reach out to the Rocky Mountain Tribal Leaders Council initially to get all 11 tribes' support for this legislation. We did that back in 2016 and 17. And then when the legislation was ultimately introduced last year, we went back to the Rocky Mountain Tribal Leaders Council to get their renewed support. And we've also built language into the legislation. I know it's hard to read probably where you're sitting, but there's language in the legislation that honors the connection for hunting, fishing, and gathering and other cultural purposes that tribes have to these rivers. And then there's a thorough briefing book, which is also on the table out front, that talks about the Indigenous connection to these rivers. We've got numbers on our side with this. 79% of Montanans support the Montana Headwaters Legacy Act. That's 8 out of 10 people. You know, we're in a great place to move this forward. And yeah, I realize my time's getting a little bit short here, so I'm just going to move forward. But But there's been a number of polls that have been conducted in the last 6 years. This is the most popular form of federal protection in Montana with a bill in place at this time period. Montanans care about the river. So this is what it'll do: protect 20 streams, 385 river miles in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem in the Smith River system, and that covers basically these iconic streams that you would know by name: the Madison, the Gallatin, the Upper Yellowstone, the Boulder and Stillwater, and then the Rock Creek over by Red Lodge. And we're really fortunate to have a sponsor for this bill. Senator Tester came forward in 2020 to introduce it initially, and then reintroduced it in the next congressional session in 2021. He added more rivers and more river miles when that second introduction was made. And as it was mentioned in my bio, we finally got a hearing for this bill, which is going to happen next week on June 7th. So if you care about this, I just please encourage you to call Senator Daines sometime this week and let him know that you support this process. We've had some really productive meetings with him in the last few weeks on this legislation, so fingers crossed that he'll come on board. He hasn't taken a position yet, but we'd like to see this legislation pass by the end of this year. And my last slide, I just want to talk about an emerging topic that's really important to me, and I know it's really important to a lot of people in this room. So in the last year and a half, the Greater Yellowstone Coalition has hired 3 Indigenous staff to work out of our Fort Washakie office right here on the Wind River Reservation. And we're building a campaign to unify, to ally water and buffalo. Basically what Jason has talked about in a couple of different sessions here, to see a substantial return of bison to this reservation, but coupled with this grassroots effort to restore the Wind River in an ecological way and in a cultural way. We already are working with partners from Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribal business councils, the 2 TIPO offices here. We've had great conversations with the Fish and Wildlife Service. The Restoring Shoshone Ancestral Food Program is on board because of the cultural significance of food that's connected to the riparian zone of the Big Wind River. But this goes back to paradigm change. This goes back to realizing that there is a economic, ecological, and social injustice here that has proliferated since the late 19-teens or 1920s when the reclamation project for Diversion Dam went into place, stealing money from Indian appropriations in the order of $70 million back in 1920 to build the dam, where the vast majority, actually all of that water went to non-tribal users on the Wind River Reservation. Imagine getting away with that in the year 2022. We owe it to everybody to come together on this issue, to find solutions where non-tribal irrigators can still use water, and the river, which is a dying river below Diversion Dam for 55 miles, is ecologically restored and culturally restored. And I think there's a path forward with all of this, and I think that the support that we have from Washington, D.C. and the Department of Interior, especially right now, and the people that are here today, all of you invested in this topic, we can make a difference and find solutions moving forward. So thank you for your time, and I appreciate you all being here.
Oki niskuni tanaku awanoki. Nixis honesta estanski, instansta vitosta. And Dominic's Kanatami. Hello and welcome. Thank you for having me here. And thank you for hosting to the Eastern and Northern Shoshone tribes. My name is Termaine Edmo, and I am a complete generalist, still my specialty here, trying to decide what that is. So, a little nervous, and I'm just going to give a little backdrop of the history of how the Blackfeet Climate Adaptation Plan started and what we are doing now to mitigate and sustain our plan and our Blackfeet Nation. and just some other little odds and ends that I've been doing in my capacity. So, in 2018, the Blackfeet Nation released a comprehensive Blackfeet Climate Adaptation Plan, which works to protect our community's diverse ecosystems from the impacts of a rapidly changing climate. Underlying this plan is the Blackfeet understanding that people and nature are one, and that people can only be healthy if we ensure the health of the environment we depend upon. The Blackfeet Nation borders Glacier National Park to the east and Canada to the north. The Blackfeet Nation is not only our home, it's where we originated from the soil we walk on to the water and land we protect. The Amskapipiqani have worked hard to preserve our language, customs, traditions, and practices throughout this 10,000 years we have called this region home. The Amskapipiqani people hold a deep understanding that what happens to the land happens to us, and that we can best protect ourselves by honoring our traditional principles of values and stewardship. Climate change threatens all that we hold sacred, and the impacts of changing climate are visible everywhere. For example, in recent years, the Blackfeet Nation has seen an increase in frequency of extreme weather events. These extreme weather events disrupt power and water supplies, communication systems, and transportation, making it difficult and critical for services. During winter storm emergencies, people can become stranded in their homes, and insufficient food or medicine can jeopardize their health and well-being. More intense flooding can spread waterborne illnesses and wash out roads, making it difficult for people to access medical care and other services. In 2019, we experienced several winter storm emergencies and a flood disaster. During these events, our communities demonstrated exceptional resilience, compassion, and creativity. Neighbors helping one another free vehicles from mud and snow. Neighbors helping feed cattle that were stuck in snowbanks. And Department of Natural Resources airlifting food to our most rural communities. So our Blackfeet Climate Adaptation Plan is one of several efforts which we work to protect the health and well-being of our people. We are developing initiatives to address impacts such as vector-borne illnesses and to ensure our people understand the connection between climate change and health. We will continue to use our Climate Adaptation Plan as a foundation from which we try hard to care for our environment, ourselves, our people, and our way of life. So we really got creative with our plan and how we are approaching the future to sustain who we are as Piikani people. As you can see in Glacier National Park, this again is almost 85% gone. Our snow caps are no longer there. So we are working to implement this plan from not only a plan. I've been in this capacity for 3 years, and I've seen over 27 plans sitting in the Blackfeet Nation planning documents, and I've seen only about 3 of those plans be implemented. Our plan is one. And so as long as I am here, I refuse to let it be just another plan. So with that, I will talk about the Six the Key project, which was our first implementation from the water sector of our Blackfeet Climate Adaptation Plan. So the Six the Key project was a direct the Six the Key project is where humans mimic the beaver dams to increase natural water storage, restore wetlands habitat, and have drawn upon this from the Blackfeet Nation's creation stories. We looked to one of our first large-scale engineers and keystone species, the beaver. The beaver, or Six the Key, is the pillar of the Blackfeet people and integral to implementing traditional ecological knowledge. By incorporating tech, we begin to heal the land, tell our story, and effectively plan. The Blackfeet Climate Adaptation Plan is a multi-agency collaboration that followed the National Climate Assessment Trends and Predictions specific to the Northwest region of Montana. The Center for Large Landscape facilitated a series of meetings to prioritize planning, keeping Piikani traditional way at the forefront of the planning process. This plan is a working document that features 8 natural resources, high priority risks, strategies, and action steps for each sector. Out of the 8 natural resource sectors, the water sector has been successfully implemented with the Beaver Mimicry Project. So the 60E project is a 3-pillar project that empowers our youth, naturally stored water and naturally stored water and effectively have beaver management, effectively plan for beaver management. So we're really increasing these natural water storage, but what we're doing is we're adapting to our drought as it continues to worsen, and we're taking our youth and we're putting it into their hands. Where we have traditionalists coming out and honoring the landscape by bringing the spirit back into the water and really giving life back into us through that prayer process. And so with that traditional knowledge, really they gained a sense of identity. They found out who they were. And some of these students have never even seen a Piikani ceremony, a Blackfeet ceremony, with over 70% of our participants being of Blackfeet descent. We open new avenues. So we're really bringing that spirit back into the process and adapting to a changing climate. And so with this Beaver Mimicry Project, it's a low-tech, cost-effective, all-natural process where we take large pine pole, willows, sod, rocks, and we begin to naturally mimic the beavers. And so with this, each student was gifted the right of transfer, so transferring that knowledge. So our traditionalists came out, our beaver bundle owners came out, and they actually honored our students by transferring that knowledge before our project even began. So we held the ceremony before, right on the landscape, and we have a pilot site and a private home site. And so with these private homeowners, we actually wanted to equip them with something they can do themselves. So when the students were done with their internship, we wanted something they can maintenance themselves. So we actually created the Beaver Mimicry Guidebook to help sustain landowners, homeowners, and to offset property damage. So we're using the beaver as tools, as our brothers, how they should be. One beaver can store 3.6 billion gallons of water in its lifetime. So we need a beaver in every backyard, right? We need to stop looking at them as nuisance and start utilizing them as our brother, and how we can adapt and plan effectively. So, and here's the process. It's really a simple process that anyone can do, and it's manageable. And we've raised over 2.5 feet of groundwater, and we're recharging our wetlands and improving our habitat. And we took it a step further, and so we implemented the second part of our water sector, which was snow fencing. So we're using, we're losing our snow caps, where we wanted to look at how we can keep the water on the landscape. So we looked at the Montana Department of Transportation's highway fences, and we started researching how we can utilize traditional ecological knowledge and how our ancestors did it in the past. And those were all natural methods that we used to adapt in the past. And so the willow fencing is a key project right now that we are doing with the Blackfeet high school students, where they actually are creating a snow water equivalent and actually monitoring how much water we're capturing. And so we're really in the early stages of our Blackfeet climate adaptation plan. This is just one sector. And so we have 8 sectors that I would like to see implemented through my lifetime. And I think that's about it. Thank you.
Hasselhal Pesia, Jordan Thompson, Kerry Squest, Totin Shumamet, Uchi Scaliu. Hello everyone, my name is Jordan Thompson. It's so good to be here. I'm a tribal member from the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. And I know we're kind of, how much time should I take here? 16, all right. I'm a little bit behind, and I know I'm keeping some of you guys from the slot machines. So that's either a good thing or maybe I'm keeping you from a jackpot, but maybe I'm saving you guys a bunch of money. Probably saving me a bunch of money the longer I talk, so buckle in, you know. All right, we'll try 12. Since I started teaching at the law school, you know, an hour and a half class twice a week, I can just go, so I'll try not to go that long. So, if you guys heard me the last session, the Flathead reservations where I'm from were made up of 3 tribes, the Sanka band of Kootenai Indians up north, and so they're the southernmost band of Kootenays, the Kalispe or Ponderay, and they're the easternmost band of Salish, and then the Bitterroot Salish down south of Missoula. And traditionally we'd come over east of the Continental Divide to hunt buffalo, and then in the summer we'd go trade over in the Spokane area where my mom still lives. So I really liked what you said, Charles, earlier about just kind of that love and the oneness. I think you kind of cracked the code, because that's what I've always heard, is just the relationship with everything and the relationship with everything. And that's how we lived. And so when you think about water, when you think about buffalo, when you think about our animal relatives, that's how we treated it, as relationships. And not only relationships, but when you listen to our creation stories, the animals came here first and taught us how to live in this place. And so really revered relationships because they taught us how to live here. And so same thing with the water, you know, just spiritual reverence there. So the Hellgate Treaty, Lewis and Clark came through our territory in 1805. That was the first white person we'd ever seen. And he was traveling with a African-American man and probably saved his life, because in our culture, when you're in mourning, you cover yourself with ash. And so we thought they were in mourning. We thought the Suyapis, or non-Indians, with their beards, you know, and red skin, we thought they were in pretty bad shape, and they were kind of in bad shape when they came through, so we gave them horses and provisions to get through the pass. But then what we didn't know, it was an expedition for mapping. They wanted to map the West for trade routes, and so they kept coming, and they kept coming, and they kept coming, and then, you know, the railroad was built, which really allowed for more extractive practices, because weight wasn't limited. You could just send loads east. One of the first major shipments was buffalo bones, which blew my mind. And you see these pictures of mounds and mounds and mounds of buffalo bones, and they send them east for fertilizer and charcoal. It's just mind-blowing and really sad when you see those pictures. So in 1855, we signed the Hellgate Treaty, Governor Isaac Stevens. And so if you hear Stevens treaties, those are important because it provides for off-reservation hunting and fishing rights, which comes into play a lot. I put a map of Flathead. It's not the best picture out there, but it's Flathead Lake. And so on the east side here are the Mission Mountains. They're gorgeous. The treaty bisects the lake right in the middle. And so the south end of the lake is on a reservation. The north end of the lake isn't on a reservation. And that really provides for some interesting co-management with the state. We have to work together in order to have cohesive management. So when you're talking about aquatic invasive species, you're talking about fisheries, those all come into play, and we have very different ideas of what a well-managed water body should look like at times. As I mentioned in the last panel too, as part of the assimilation policy that the United States was really forcing in the latter part of the 1800s and the early part of the 1900s, they had the Dawes Act, or the General Allotment Act. And so in 1904, they had the Flathead Allotment Act, which was to provide each individual Indian with either 80 or 160 acres of private land, and then it would open up the excess to non-Indians. And so you can see there how the reservation looked in 1855, and then 10 years after allotment in 1910, it opened it up, and you can see all of the white map is non-Indian land. The orange are individual Indian allotments, which were often lost later on. And so just FYI, there's generally three major, there's more, but three major types. There's trust land, the tribe owns trust land held in trust by the United States government. Individual trust land, which an individual tribal member owns, held in trust by the United States government. And then fee land, which is just usually under state jurisdiction, owned states, the most pure form of title you can have. So even though I'm a tribal member living on my own reservation, I have fee land, and so I pay state and local taxes on it. Indians do pay taxes. Federal taxes too, so anyway, I'm beside the point. I'm starting to ramble. I said I had a long time. So one major component here that I want to touch on is the Flathead Indian Irrigation Project. And so to help us, the Indians, become better farmers, and more realistically to entice non-Indians onto the reservation, the federal government in 1908 authorized the Flathead Indian Irrigation Project, which was, you can see from the slide, 1,300 miles of canals, dams, and reservoirs. This is the largest Indian irrigation project in the country. It was financed first by the sale of Indian lands, and then it was to be paid back by the people served by the irrigation project. But by the 1920s, folks were going broke. It was the Great Depression, and so the BIA was trying to figure out how to pay this irrigation project back. And so what they decided was to get into a relationship with Montana Power Company, which was a sister corporation to like Anaconda Mining Company. And if you know anything about Montana history, it's like the Copper Kings and mining just owned state politics in the state in the latter part of the 1800s and early 1900s. And so instead of building a minor dam on this site that they scoped, they built a huge dam called Kerr Dam. And the farmers liked it, the power company liked it, the BIA liked it. The only folks who didn't like it were the Indians. They really didn't want that dam there because it was built on a sacred site. It was a place of great spiritual significance, and so absolutely did not want the dam there. They tried their best to resist and oppose it every step of the way, but in the end, it didn't matter. And I just wanted to point that out because it shows sort of how powerless our tribes were on our own reservation. You know, we signed this treaty in 1855 with the thought that this would be a place for our children and our grandchildren and great-grandchildren forever to live as Indian people. And by the early part of the 1900s, we had no power on our own reservation. We were essentially supposed to be white and partake in the American dream, but we were starving to death. It was really bad. And here's a picture of the chiefs in front of the dam after it was completed in 1939. And so what I'm talking about is the Cultural Waterways Ordinance, and I just wanted to kind of give you guys a quick snapshot into history to show how we had no management over our own water, over our own, land, and this is the result of that. As I mentioned earlier, federal laws play a huge role in tribes' ability to have self-determination. Now, I have to say, United States federal Indian law is extremely racist, totally grounded in racism and white supremacy. With that being said, it's still very beneficial to have the U.S. law on your side. And in the greater scheme of the world, it's although the United States probably gets a D-, it's still doing better than 99% of the world. I'd love to visit with you more afterwards too. So two big ones were the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934. This allowed for tribes to reorganize with more of a boilerplate type of government. Instead of the hereditary chiefs and bands, it was, here's a uniform tribal government that the United States could understand and say, all right, now we can have somebody to negotiate with and deal with. Termination, it's like a pendulum. Federal Indian law and policy is like a pendulum where it goes, I'd say, from really bad to kind of bad. So Reorganization Act, they saw the terrible results of allotment, and so the Indian Organization was passed. Then termination, that pendulum swings the other way, and then the Indian Self-Determination Act of 1975 starts swinging the other way. And that was under Nixon. Nixon was actually a very good friend of the lower 48 tribes. You can read about that sometime. It's kind of an interesting story. So the Mission Mountain Wilderness, after the Indian Self-Determination Act of 1975, Salish Kootenai tribes, or CSKT for short, really began to think about, like, what can we do with this act? This act allowed for tribes to contract for traditionally run BIA programs. And so if there was like a program on the reservation, or kind of an operation on the reservation, the tribes were trying to figure out, can we manage that? Can we operate that? And so one thing that the tribes have been wanting to do for a long time was create a Mission Mountain Wilderness area. So those Mission Mountains I was talking about, they created an ordinance that protected 92,000 acres. About 10,000 of that's grizzly habitat, so 35 miles long and 5 miles wide, where there's no heavy equipment, no vehicles. It's very limited access. You have to get a tribal permit unless you're a tribal member to go up there, and it's very serene. It's just a wonderful place. And so there was the story about 4 grandmas going in front of tribal council and demanding that they pass that, and they wouldn't leave till the council passed it, and there it is in ordinance. So the Cultural Waterways has a little different story. And so I just put some pictures of the Mission Mountains in there, just so you guys know how gorgeous they are, which is one of the reasons why I think our reservation is so allotted. I put that one on the bottom with the barn in there because that's an iconic barn. You'll see that barn in pictures all over. So I was at Mackenzie River Pizza and saw that barn, and I was like, oh, it's from home. So if you ever see that barn, from the Flat Indian Reservation. Okay, getting to the moral of my presentation here, the Cultural Waterways Ordinance. So this was an idea that was concocted in the early 2000s by the Culture Committee, in the 1970s with that Indian Self-Determination Act, and kind of the tribes really understanding, like, we're going to be here and where do we want to go. They formed 2 culture committees. One was the Kootenai Culture Committee, the other was the Salish Pundare Culture Committee. And so the idea for the Cultural Waterways, there was a Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, and they said, hey, we should protect our own rivers here. And so it kind of fizzled out in the first iteration, but then in 2016, I was working in the legal department, and we had some really energetic young Yale law students wanting to work on a project. I said, perfect. A lot of times you get so overwhelmed with your day-to-day, you don't have time to do anything extra. And so here was a team of fine folks who were willing to help. And so I'm already running short on time, so I'm going to skip through that, but it was a collaboration between a lot of departments. As you can see, 2 culture committees, Natural Resources Department, Lands Department, Forestry, Preservation, and Legal. And it was amazing just to kind of get that. I know a lot of times tribes get siloed in their different departments. All governments get siloed in their different departments. But this was really an across-the-board effort to try to figure out how to protect our waterway. So we came up with the ordinance, the Cultural Waterways Ordinance. It did 2 things. The first thing it does is create a process for designating a cultural waterway. And the second thing it does is actually designate the Lower Flathead River as a cultural waterway. The authority for the ordinance, our Constitution, our treaty, and our inherent authority, which was buttressed by court decisions. And so we had some pretty amazing legal victories in the 70s and 80s with water rights and around the shoreline. So that's a whole other story. But based on those, we were able to pass that. The other thing that really benefited us was the Lower Flathead River. We own 90% of the adjacent land around that. And so if you're trying to regulate, or if you're trying to come up with zoning, especially if you're a tribe, land ownership is the absolute best way to do that. There's other ways, but the best way is just to own the land. Findings for needing the cultural waterways, we looked at climate change, of course. Our population is exploding, as much of Montana. Increased recreation and the health of the tribes. Water is sacred, and so how do you protect these areas? And then one thing that we made sure to do, on our reservation we have 35,000 folks, 30,000 are non-Indians, and so if the tribes do anything, like I talked about in the last panel, you're going to probably get opposition unless you can get them on your team. And so we did a lot of public outreach and public comment to say, hey, we're trying to protect the river. And it was a pretty interesting crowd. You had a lot of kind of non-Indian folks coming in that, I was nervous going into these meetings, but by the end of it, I feel like we were holding hands because come to find out, we all want to protect the river. And so it really is, I'm so happy to be at this conference because I'm just looking out and just feel a lot of goodwill and good energy and a lot of people coming together to really put our interests together to come up with some good things. When I was in law school, the kind of attorney I really wanted to be was the kind of attorney that cruised around the rest of my truck with my dog And I don't have a dog yet, but I have a truck. And I'm working on that dog. But this was a really cool one because in order to really get us out and to understand the beauty of the Flathead River and the significance of it, there's Thompson Smith, he's a tribal historian who's been working for the tribes since forever. And there's me and 2 Yale law students. We had another one who was pregnant at the time. And so we were out on the river. Thompson took us out on canoes, and you can see the river and just silence, you know, just birds in the river, and there's just nothing like it. So I'm just so happy to hear, you know, we're trying to protect more Montana rivers because there's power, there's power, there's medicine, there's energy there that you can only get by being there. And so I was like, wow, my God, it's been my favorite project I was working on. So I'm not going to go through the whole cultural waterways ordinance. If you want to know more about it, I'd be happy to share it. Here's just the table of contents, so you can kind of see how we broke it down. Authority, findings, policy, what a cultural waterway is, how to designate one. Anyone or a department can designate, and then the Natural Resource Department will write a management plan for it within the next year. So we're coming up on the management plan for the ordinance that was passed last year, and then the rest of this is the designation of the Lower Flathead River as a cultural waterway. So one of the big issues the cultural committee had was they didn't want any more dams on the river, and so that is actually in the ordinance, no more dams on the Lower Flathead River. But then these other issues we're going to come up with regulations for, which again will include public comment to make sure that everyone's voice is heard in the process. That also makes it more defensible if it should ever go to court, which I'm hoping, you know, it never will, but if it is, it's always nice to build as much process in as you can, and so we're building in public comment there. So with that, I think I'm pretty good on my time, and I'm just so happy to be here again. I just want to thank the Northern Arapaho and Eastern Shoshone, you know, for welcoming us here on the reservation. It's beautiful here, beautiful people here, and thank you for listening.
Thank you.